This is the Sacred Birth Circle, and today's episode is exactly what we stand for, giving you information that you will not find in your usual birth guides. We want to help you have a sacred and safe birth experience. So today we will be discussing stillbirth prevention. Follow us on social media and make sure you share this episode with everyone you know. Welcome to the Sacred Birth Circle. I'm Anna Vick. I'm here with one of my favorite people. I will say that is a fact, and my husband will probably confirm. We have had a lot of late night chuckles, and well, our humor is exactly the same. So I love her to death. This is Samantha Banerjee, of course, if you don't know her already. She's the executive director of Push, and I will let her further introduce herself. But today's conversation, as I kind of captioned it, is a difficult one. It's about stillbirth, and of course, there will be a story involved. Not a trigger warning for anyone, because I think this is important for everyone to hear, even if you haven't experienced loss. Unfortunately, it's happened to so many people who just kind of turn a blind eye, don't want to hear this conversation, and we wish we had. So please listen all the way through. It's going to have some great tips as well, which is really the purpose, right? We're not here to just share our trauma and, cry again. I'm sure she's going to make me cry like she always does. So you guys just hang tight and you're going to learn so much. So Samantha, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us who you are. Tell us about your family and whatever you want to share.
Thanks so much for having me on Sacred Birth Circle, Anna. And I love you too. You're also one of my favorite people, and so grateful for all you do in honor of Owen and all our babies. And yeah, so my story is, like Anna said, it's a tough one. I mean, my first pregnancy, it was in 2013, my first child, my daughter Alana. It was just absolutely perfect and blissful. I was 28, I think at the time, 27. And, super healthy. Got married a year ago, is in the best shape of my life. And, you know, we just were at such a beautiful point in our lives where we had just, got married, bought our dream home, and both of us were in jobs that we loved. And I just remember one time, it was shortly before I was pregnant with her. We were driving back from the farmer's market on the weekend, and I just started crying. My husband's like, "What's wrong?" I'm just like, our life is so perfect. Like, it's everything I ever wanted, and I just can't wait to start our family. Like, I can't wait. Like, this is like, we're so lucky to be able to give this to a child. And then we tried, like, maybe like 2 or 3 times to get pregnant, got the positive pregnancy test. We told the whole family, and everyone was just so excited. I mean, she was the first grandchild on both sides of our family. And we have a very big, tight knit, loving family. Alana has 3 uncles, between all of our brothers, and like, they would sit there for hours, with her hand on my belly waiting for her to kick. Like, she was just so loved and anticipated, and we made so many wonderful memories through that pregnancy. But yeah, I mean, and we were just so ready. And, like, I am a researcher type of person. I'm a type A. Like, I like to know everything about everything. I'm a planner. So I read every book, blog, website I could get my hands on. Like, I took the Bradley method course. It was a 10-week birthing course, really focused on having natural birth. And, I loved it because it was so empowering, and it was so about, like, knowing your body, and, and like, I don't know, just having a really empowering birth experience. There's, you hear horror stories all the time, right? About things that people have been through. And we know the statistics in this country are not good when it comes to things like unnecessary C-sections and, maternal mortality. Horrible. I really didn't hear anything about stillbirth I mean, we know now, that those statistics are just as bad, if not worse, than everything else. But I didn't hear about that at all during my pregnancy. I remember the only time I came across the word stillbirth was in, I think, one chapter, there's one page in the Mayo Clinic book that was dedicated to stillbirth, and it was tucked away in the chapter on loss. And I remember kind of skimming through it and being like, well, you know, I this isn't relevant. This isn't going to be. I'll look at this if I have to, but it's not going to be relevant to me because by that point, by the time I read that chapter in the book, I was well past the first trimester. I think I was well into the second trimester, you know, and everything had been absolutely perfect the entire pregnancy. You know, every time I saw the doctor, textbook, she's going right on schedule. She's, you know, right on her growth curve and everything looks perfect. 4-chamber heart, like she's strong. She's an athlete in there, you know, and my doctor, so I chose a practice that was 2 OBs and 2 midwives in a smaller practice in a smaller hospital because I had watched the business of being born. And I was really, really wary of, you know, having an over medicalized birth. You know, I was the poster child for a, you know, low risk pregnancy where, you know, everything's supposed to go swimmingly if you just follow all the rules. You know, I did my yoga, I was eating all my organic stuff, like took my vitamins, you know, was resting. You know, I remember I read there was one book that I read that was kind of more of a fun one called Do Does Chocolate Make Sweeter Babies or something like that. And it was a bunch of like random studies about like kind of random stuff about pregnancy that were just kind of silly. And I remember one of them was about stress in pregnancy. And if you're really stressed during your pregnancy, will it result in a child that has a more like difficult or anxious personality? And I just remember reading this and thinking, what could anyone possibly be that stressed about during your pregnancy that you would allow yourself to be so upset about that it could potentially affect your child, right? Like, I mean, this is the level of privilege that I'm coming from. Like, I had no clue, just no clue how tough pregnancy could be for people, but I would certainly learn in my future ones.
Right. And what you just said, I wanted to pause because we were a low risk pregnancy and both of us ended in stillbirth. And statistically, that is actually more likely. And also for first time mothers, which sadly we'll discuss later more, we kind of feel has to do with not being heard and maybe not even being warned about certain risks. And also the level of care that you get for your normal low risk pregnancy is not what you can get at a high risk doctor. So we learned a lot from, you know, our own losses. And, you know, what you were talking about, like reading about things, it never came up in anything I ever read. The risk factors, none of them apply to me after loss. I looked at it, I said, what happened to my baby? Why did this happen? You know? And I started to research and I was like, wait a minute, like none of the risk factors. I wasn't even a first time mom. So you have that risk factor, but I had nothing else. And like, it just baffles you, right? You're like, there has to be an actual cause, which we'll get into too later, that not every stillbirth gets a cause. The majority, I would say, don't. So it's pretty sad because after you're like, what did I do wrong? When you did everything humanly possible and no different from any of your friends, you know, and anyone
No,
else, you
exactly.
know.
No, and that, I mean, that was one of the hardest things was that, you know, during my pregnancy, you know, I really got into the whole like natural birth community. And, you know, I was going to La Leche League meetings, you know, before I even had my baby, just to like be around other breastfeeding moms and like learn, you know, how to do it and start like building, you know, contacts with other families who had similar values to me and things like that. And, um, you know, I really felt like I was becoming a part of a really, really supportive and empowering community. And then after my loss, I felt really, really abandoned by the community because I think the thing, and it's not anybody's fault in particular. I think it's a self-protective type thing, you know, like when I am a walking horror story, you know, like I was the poster child for a perfect pregnancy, and now I'm the poster child for how you can do everything you're supposed to do, and you can still just be absolutely punished by the universe through no fault of your own. And I think that that's really scary. It's really scary to other people that it hasn't happened to you yet, because if it can happen to me, it can happen to anyone. Again, I had every privilege at my advantage during my pregnancy. Um, and I did all the things you were supposed to do. And if it could happen to me, I mean, that, what does that say about everybody else? And, and that's a really tough pill for people to swallow. And I think so much of what I loved about the messages coming out of the natural birth community was that sense of empowerment and that sense of control, right? That if you are in control of your birth and you don't let, the hospital force you into the cascade of interventions, and say, you write up your birth plan and say, this is what I want, and you advocate for yourself, like, you can make sure that you're going to have a beautiful birth experience, a beautiful start to your relationship with your child. I mean, I wanted that so desperately. I mean, I, from when I was 5, I used to breastfeed my stuffed animals. Like, I wanted to be a mom, like, my entire life. Like, I went to business school. I went to Wharton, and I just remember being the only, like, feeling like I was the only woman there who was just like concerned about work-life balance. So I was like, I know I'm going to have a family. I also want to have like an awesome career. Like, how do I balance these things? And everyone's like, why are you talking about kids now? Like, what company do you want to work for? And I was just like, I want to have a baby. And so I was ready, I was so ready to become a mom. And that was my priority. I mean, my daughter was the culmination of all of my dreams coming true. We just loved her. We love her beyond words, and we just wanted her so badly to be here with us. And we were so close.
Right. And so I think that's also tough because people assume, like, once you're at the very end, especially you were due, there can be nothing that can go wrong, right? I mean, what can go wrong? And the thing is, I did hear about loss, but it had to do more with like at birth, delivery, some kind of tragedy,
Or
maybe
like
it's like placenta abruption, which, does cause stillbirth, or
trisomy 21, like genetic issues, like all things that, after the 20-week anatomy scan, they said, oh, all clear, everything is
right. What can,
and my doctor, despite being in a, like, kind of a smaller, more hands-off, more, gentle birth, like natural birth focused office, she still was super cautious. Like, I went in, despite being a low risk pregnancy with absolutely no indication of there being any issues, I had an NST every week starting at 36 weeks. And, she just did that routinely for everybody, because why not? Why not just, have a, and, of course, I know there were some in the community who were just like, oh, you don't need that. And I was just like, well, I love to hear my baby's heartbeat. I love to have that reassurance. I'm a straight A student, right? I like to pass those tests. I like that reassurance. So I loved going in there, and I'll never forget, my 39-week checkup was on a Tuesday afternoon. And I went in, I did my, they put it on the same spot, her heartbeat starts, she's doing the thing. I remember the doctor comes in and she says, little athlete in there, sounds perfect. It's just textbook. And it's like, great. I was like, there's my daughter, already passing all her tests with flying colors. And, I was so proud of her. She's doing so well. And,
in retrospect, we have 2020 vision now. So
yeah, there were red flags
that there
that I didn't recognize, and that my providers didn't recognize, and that others brushed off. So I think the first thing is, this is emerging, a lot of emerging research on this. So there's not a lot of hard evidence or stuff, but you hear a lot from moms in the loss community that they had a bad feeling about the pregnancy from very, very early on, well before there were any signs that they, knew of trouble. And it's funny, for me, like, I felt very anxious through the whole pregnancy in a way I wasn't kind of expecting. And I think that was part of the reason I was so drawn to the natural birth community, was that, it was so reassuring, again, that, if I just follow these, these rules and this philosophy that's laid out, that, and just trust my body. I was really into the whole, I played, competitive basketball and then rugby in college and then roller derby. And I just had I had taken such a beating so many times. and my body had always just got up and been strong. I really trusted that if I just let my body do its thing, that this is what I was built for, and again, I'm not, I'm tall, I have wide hips, like I have a birthing body, like I just like everything for me was just checking all the boxes, right? So I just felt like I just needed to trust nature and let my body do what it needs to do. And trust my daughter. Again, I felt this really, really deep connection with my daughter. Um,
Alana.
and
I
I
think
just
you haven't said her
ever kept
name
saying,
yet.
"Oh, you would know if something was wrong with her,"
Mhm.
right? Like, and I just thought I didn't really understand how or what the mechanism was. Again, in retrospect, now I know that way I'm supposed to know my daughter and know something is wrong is by paying attention to her fetal movements. But no one ever explicitly said that. They just said, "Oh, you'll know if something's wrong."
Yeah.
So I just thought I would magically know, because our bond was strong and is strong. Um, but I didn't. Um, and so I had this like very anxious feeling the whole time, and I found a lot of comfort again in doing, the birth course, doing the research. I remember one time coming back from the Bradley method one night. Me and my husband were in the car, and I again just started crying. He was like, "What's wrong?" And I was like, "I just, you know, I don't know how I'm ever going to keep her safe in this world." Like I felt like the only place that she was safe was in my belly. And I didn't know how I was going to keep her safe when she was finally born and out here. And like I had just had no idea. I had no idea the danger that she was in when she was inside me. And around 37 weeks, I started getting this really weird feeling like she was going to be born early. Like I was just like, oh my God, like I feel like and like I didn't have contractions or any like preterm labor signs. I just had this weird feeling like she's going to come. She needs to come. And around the same time, I did notice her movement slowing down. And again, I had that checkup every week, the last couple of weeks of the pregnancy, and I would go in and the nurse say, "Oh, is the baby moving?" And I would say, "Yeah, but I feel like she's slowing down a little bit." And the nurse would say, "Oh, that's okay, that's normal, she's just running out of room, she's saving up her energy for birth, like nothing to worry about." And again, now in retrospect, there's lots and lots of data, lots of evidence, lots of studies have shown that that is not true. A thriving baby does not slow down at the end of pregnancy. And with my next two pregnancies, with my two my son and my second daughter were born alive and healthy, um, that absolutely was not the case. I tracked the fetal movements like a hawk. And I have spreadsheets upon spreadsheets, and I can show you that they showed very consistent patterns of movements. Their strength of movement increased, the frequency of their movement, I wouldn't say it increased, but I would say it became easier and easier to see the frequency as they got bigger. Like they did not slow down in any way. And that's a huge misconception, which is rampant amongst the general public and sadly amongst our medical community as well. But again, one of the reasons that we're working so hard to change that. But I didn't know this at this point. I said, okay, the nurse is telling me it's fine. I don't think she even bothered to tell the doctor because she was so convinced that it's fine. So I didn't worry about it either. But so at this time, around 37 weeks, she started slowing down. I started having this weird feeling like she needed to be born. And then
Well,
around
that's tough too, like you were saying, because of the training you had gone into about natural birth.
exactly,
Like, who thinks at 37 weeks, let me go and get an induction when you've been taught this whole entire time? Induction's
yeah,
like
exactly. I thought like
a
37 weeks
demon.
super
Cannot-
premature. So like in my next two pregnancies,
yeah.
I electively induced my children at 37 weeks, and they both came out perfectly ready to go, fully developed lungs, 8-pound babies, good to go. But at this point, I was just like, oh my God, she's gonna be so premature at 37 weeks. Like, this is not good. Like, I got to try to keep her in here as long as possible. Like, what if they start telling me that they need to do an induction? I literally hadn't even bothered to research like an induction or an epidural because I was
For not
so
having it.
absolutely certain that that was not going to be me. I was not going to have that no matter what.
Mhm.
And
Well, I think a lot of the courses focus on getting rid of the fear and being prepared for natural birth, laboring
yeah,
without pain as much as possible, mental.
mental,
Just
exactly.
really working on yourself to kind of prepare yourself that you will say no to any interventions that are offered. And, of course, we're talking about a 1% or less, of pregnancies that this happens to. But if you have that immediate intuition and you're starting to panic at the end, it's not necessarily the first time mom jitters, which is what they write it up
Um,
to. So I think it's really important that you're telling this part of the story because you were that mother who was going for the natural birth the whole way through, and that caused you to kind of question your
Like
own
it really
intuition,
caused me
which
to
is kind of
question
like
myself.
opposite of what they're training in a way, which, they want you to trust yourself and your body, but so much so that you're going to now discount the other feeling that you're having.
Exactly. Yeah. So it was really tough. So like I very specifically remember again, like one of my good friends, he texted me, it was probably around like 37, 38 weeks, being like, I can't believe you're having again, I was like the first of like all my good friends that have a child. He's like, I can't believe you're having a baby. Like it doesn't feel real. And I was like, it really doesn't feel real. Like, I mean, she's literally sitting here with me, like, and it doesn't feel real. And what really freaked me out after the fact was that my mom said to me, my mom, again, we're really close, this is her first grandchild. She always referred to her as my baby. How's my baby doing in there? um my mom later said to me that she never felt like the pregnancy was real. She said, and she's like, I had 3 kids, I never felt like that once through any of my own pregnancies, but she's like, I just had this weird feeling like she was never really going to come home. So
Really bizarre. And like you said, this is anecdotal almost, but every mom I think that has had a stillbirth that I've talked to really have said similar things. Like, I didn't have a fully prepared wardrobe
yeah,
because I already had a child. So I was going to use some of Naomi's, hand me downs that were like gender neutral because we didn't know what she was when she was born. So it was all yellow and green and white. I'm like, oh, I can use that for Owen. And then eventually buy him some outfits. And I also didn't want a baby shower. I was like, I'm not having that because I already have tons of stuff of hers. I've been saving, nice things. And like, I don't want everyone to have to buy something. So let me just have a little sip and see, when he comes, we'll let them meet him. But I had that kind of weird feeling too, where I was like, I don't see this, like, I don't see myself as a mom of two yet. Like, it was just so weird.
it's so weird and it's so hard to explain because again, at the same time I'm so invested in
Mhm.
this pregnancy, right? Like I was doing everything in my power to make it real. We had 2 baby showers for her, 2 separate baby showers, one in New Jersey, my husband's family, and one in New York with my family. Like, um, yeah, I mean, it was just really odd, the whole thing. And later, and this is what's really freaky now that so it wasn't until 6.5 years later after she was born that I was at a stillbirth conference and I sat next to it was the only open seat in the house in the front of the room. I didn't really want to sit in the front row, but I was late, so I ran in and sat in the front row, and it turns out who's next to me, this guy named Dr. Harvey Kleiman from Yale University. And I was like, oh, I kind of feel like I've heard of this guy. He's a placental pathologist, and now Harvey's like one of my dear friends. We work very closely together on a lot of stuff. But and at one point, the speaker asked us to introduce herself to the person next to us. So Harvey and I start talking, and he finds out I'm a lost mom. He was like, "How do you know the cause of your baby's death?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, I'm pretty sure, like 95% sure. Like this is what it was. I did a lot of research, and he offered to do a placental pathology, report on her." And I was like, "Well, I might as well like." Covered my insurance, and I have a lot of friends who don't have answers or have any idea what happened to their baby, so let me do it. And when the report came back from Harvey, what it determined was, first of all, what I had thought I knew, and I know we're kind of skipping around here, but basically what I found out was that the issues started happening right around 37 weeks, right when my intuition started telling me this baby needs to be born. And what was going on inside of me, and I didn't know at the time, was that um, she had a abnormally short, like her umbilical cord was like yay long. That's really like abnormally short. Um, Thin. Again, I think it was like a centimeter wide, a very thin umbilical cord, and hypocoiled. So normally, you think of like the spiral cord, and those twists and the Wharton's jelly on there is what protects your cord from getting compressed. And her cord was untwisted. And it was funny because at the delivery, my mom saw it and she was just like, "Why does the cord look so weird?" She's like, "It looks like a piece of ribbon." And the midwife at the time was like, "Oh, that's just because she's already died. There's no blood in the cord or anything like that." But it turns out that's not true. It's because she had a really messed up umbilical cord, which again, probably could have been seen on ultrasound. but nobody was looking for it. I didn't even have an ultrasound after my 20-week anatomy scan. I think I had one around 28 weeks when I was sweating a lot. And I wasn't sure if I was leaking fluid or if it was just like sweat. Gross. Pregnancy is gross. So I went to the doctor in a panic for a checkup, and it turned out it was just sweat. It was fine. They gave me an ultrasound then. But again, my whole third trimester, basically, I didn't have a single ultrasound. So how, even if at 37 weeks I had gone to the doctor and said, I just have this weird feeling, right? Something feels off. And they gave me an ultrasound. They would have nothing to compare it to.
They don't normally even check the cord though.
They don't.
So anybody watching,
they did. They wouldn't normally have checked the cord, and even if they had, they wouldn't have checked it since 20 weeks. 4.5 months earlier. Like that doesn't. There's no baseline, right? If you're not having regular ultrasounds, and in the lowest pregnancy in the U.S., most parents are not. They have like a couple early on. You have the 20-week. That's a lot of times it. So yeah,
and I can say as far as that in our community and the natural and the all that, people don't really want a lot of ultrasounds because they feel like that's going to give the doctor, a reason to say, well, we need to take this baby out. We need to induce, and where you're going to want to push back and say, I don't want to do that. Let's just trust my body and my baby and like wait for the time to come. So that's why when I see posts like that, it bothers me because I think that, hopefully that works for everyone, but we know it doesn't. And we know there's at least 1% that this is not going to go well for. And if they're reading that and then, they have a concern, they're like, well, I don't want to go in. I don't want to present myself and get an ultrasound because then they're going to say this about the pregnancy. And I just have to keep trusting everything's going to go perfect. Yeah. And doesn't always.
So the thing is, like, everyone acts like, oh, it's a less than 1% chance. It's a less than 1% chance. Like that means zero. Like that means a 0% chance.
Right.
But less than 1% of pregnancies in the United States, I mean, that's 23,000 babies every year that are dying in the second half of pregnancy. Yeah, it's less than 1% of pregnancies. It's 65 babies every single day. It's 3 kindergarten classes worth of kids every day that are dying in the second half of pregnancy. And most of them, like Alana and like Owen, are perfectly healthy. And just there was something going on that is not easy to detect given the tools that are being used standardly, not because tools don't exist, because they're not being used in a standard quote unquote low risk pregnancy like ours, to try to catch these vulnerable babies, and they fall through the cracks. And that's exactly what happened. So Alana had this terrible cord, and once she got big enough, she was apparently hundreds of times a day getting in a bad spot where the cord was getting compressed. And Dr. Klein described it as like stepping on a garden hose. So like imagine you step on a hose and the pressure built until it finally bursts through. And that's what happened to her cord. It would burst through and she would actually bleed out into my placenta. So the slides from the cuttings from not my placenta, Harvey would yell at me, from Alana's placenta, because the placenta is part of the baby, not part of the mom. And it's unique to every baby. Alana's placenta had, you can literally see on the sides, layers of blood, and then it would be fine cell, and then the next time she'd have compression, there's a layer, hundreds of layers of this fetal maternal hemorrhage is what it's called. And over the course of the next 2.5 weeks of the pregnancy, she slowly bled to death inside of me. No indications that it was going on. And the only indication that was going on was that her movement had slowed down. And again, when I brought that up to my providers, they falsely reassured me that it was normal and fine. So then,
and I will say to that too, because I use TikTok a lot. So I go on there and I kind of tell people, like, if you see a change in movement, go in, and then I'll get comments from all these other mothers who are like, no, my baby was fine. Oh, she stopped moving at the end and she was fine. Like, well, that is great. That's also an anecdote of your pregnancy where it did go well, thankfully, but you don't know if you were a near miss. You don't know if your child they not got out on the day of their birth, whenever that was, the next day could have been stillborn as well. So you cannot stand there and say, this is a normal situation. First of all, we don't say that and push for empowered pregnancy. We say, no, you're normal, because whatever's normal for your baby is what you should be tracking throughout your pregnancy after 26 weeks for high risk, 28 for normal, which, you start whenever you start feeling a pattern, really start to get to know your baby. It's more important to know, like how active they are throughout the day, really for me, than to do like a set count, which we do encourage you to do so. If you like to use the Count the Kicks app, I am one of the ambassadors for them as well. And I think it's so important because at
Again, I
least it
wish
gives
I'd
you a
known
tool,
that. Wish that existed during my pregnancy.
Yeah, we didn't have that, but it's an app. So you can be using it at least once a day around the same time of day. That gives you kind of a baseline of what's going on every day. But it also makes you reminded, like, I should be paying attention to movement every day. And then if you have a dip and there'll be a chart, you can go in right away and tell your provider, look at this, and you have the proof. Like, that's the other thing, is feeling like you can speak for yourself and your baby, not just like, well, my baby's not moving well today. And then they start to like give you the whole runaround. And then you're like, well, maybe it's fine. But then if you have that, you can say, no, this is different. I know for a fact, please check everything possible. And everything possible is not just the heart, because that's the last thing to go, right? So
to stop working. Exactly.
yeah, you need them to try to look at the ultrasounds, do the NST, do a lengthy one, because if it's a quick one,
Estimated placental volume to make sure, because we know so many families, right, whose babies were perfectly healthy and until they got to the very end because they just outgrew their placenta because it was a big baby and a very tiny placenta. And that's a perfectly healthy baby. And that's in a case where intervention is so needed. I mean, that literally would save 4,000 babies' lives a year.
right?
Um,
Well, and people don't measure placentas, just so everyone knows. That's with
yeah,
measuretheplacenta.org. Go to their website if you want to learn more. And we, of course, support them, and they're partners with us. So we're also pushing for that change with ACOG and a change.org petition. It's hard to get new stuff done. So everything we're saying, they'll say there's not enough research, or like, but we know plenty of parents. We know many, many stories at this point. That's enough for us to start doing more. And it's tough because of the system, really.
prioritize the research. Don't just sit around saying, "Oh, we're waiting for some." Like, then what do we need to do to get the research we need? Because there are children dying every day that we could be saving. This is completely needless.
Third trimester and viable babies, and like you said, many all healthy. Otherwise, they wouldn't have lasted that long. If they're genetic problems, we kind of can find those out. There's about 10% that are genetic, but the rest of them very healthy babies. And something might happen with your placenta, preeclampsia, all these things. And then there's signs that, again, know you're normal. How are you feeling? Go in, make sure you speak out and get all the testing done.
Absolutely. As we say, always ask, right? Like, if you notice any change or have any concerns, even if you can't articulate it. I mean, and that's what was so tough for me at the end of Alana's pregnancy, was that something definitely felt off, right? But I just was like, oh, I guess it's just, I'm just a first time mom. I don't know what I'm talking about. And I was afraid. I was afraid to push too hard. I just wanted to keep being reassured that everything was good, because everything had been good. So why wouldn't it be anymore? Right. And I was so afraid that, like, in some ways, I'm kind of glad, like, not glad, but like relieved that my doctors didn't take my concerns when I talked about her reduced movement more seriously, or something didn't come up on the NST. Because if they had said, hey, something seems off, we're not quite sure what it is, but we think we should deliver you to be safe, I would have fought them tooth and nail. I would have said, no, this is what the hospital, I watched the business of being born. I knew this is what you were going to do to me. You just are trying to make it convenient for you. Like, I really was, again, I had all this misplaced anxiety about the pregnancy, which I think was my intuition telling me that I needed to be on guard for my daughter. And instead of watching for medical issues, because it didn't seem like that was something to be concerned about, I was watching for the hospital or my providers trying to, turn my healthy birth into a medicalized.
Right. You wanted the birth experience that everyone wants. I mean, I wanted that too. I was studying for how am I going to labor without medication, and then my baby wouldn't turn on my first one. And then with this one as well, feeling healthy and normal the whole way through, I wouldn't have done that either. I mean, my situation happened before 32 weeks. So for me, I feel like even if I had been aware of any of this, had I gone in and been like, hey, 31 weeks, hey guys, there's something happening here,
what? No, I can't do
no,
that.
we're not delivering a baby that premature for no reason that they couldn't actually see. Because again, for us both, it was cord compression. So they don't look at the cord. And
No.
that's why I'm advocating now with a lot of parents. And I know people in the medical community don't all support one another in this, but cord loss, some people just call it a freak accident and that's it. We can't do anything about it. It's just going to happen. This percent of babies will just die. But I refuse to accept that, as the mother of a child that died that way. I think we have to do everything possible, even if we're being idealists, where we're saying crazy stuff like everyone should have, the cord scan with the 3D scan and, blah, blah, blah. Like that might sound unreasonable to people, especially that are like overwhelmed in the medical community. And like, we can't do that. We can't possibly watch the cord the whole time, like throughout pregnancy and deliver all these babies early and end up with all these NICU babies. And I get it. It's a very big risk to like start making those calls, but we have to push. We have to try to save babies regardless. So I don't know. It's tough to be in their shoes. I know I would not want to be an OB or high risk doctor right now ever. Because, you're waiting for a call and you're just like, you're trying to keep two people alive, if not more. So that's a hard job, and
Really hard job. And that's the thing that I think I failed to see at the time. Now that I work so closely with so many OBs and midwives and just nurses and people who do this every day, right? Like they're working so hard to keep us safe, to keep mom and baby safe, right? And that's their only goal. They went into medicine to save lives. This is why people become doctors, right? And the thing is that they've seen stuff. They've seen things like what end up happening to me and to you, and it makes them cautious and it makes them wary, and they think, like, I don't want this happen to this mom. So, that's what Harvey always says. When he was in medical school, he had a professor that said, "No, you can't argue with a healthy baby." Um, and I think a lot of and I think that can be taken too far, right? Like I think we see a lot of people going through birth trauma from unnecessary interventions, which again are coming from a good place a lot of times because providers are just trying to be extra cautious. But we see, especially in the Black maternal health community, we see a lot of maternal mortality that's happening in the postpartum period as a result of complications from unnecessary C-sections and things like that. But it scares me when I see people then pushing too far the other direction into this anti-intervention, because there is a place for interventions. And and my story is a perfect example of that, where if this had been caught in an intervention would undoubtedly have saved my daughter's life. And what really upsets me,
and you might have been mad about it. You
I
might have
would have
been
been
really upset,
no,
like
I would have been
you
mad
took
about
my
it.
perfect pregnancy, you took my
Exactly.
natural
I
birth, I
would
did
have
all
been
this work.
so mad that's what that the alternative was, that my baby would have died because I had no clue.
We didn't know it could be that, right?
So that's a good. So let's go back to the birth story, right? So
Right.
okay, so here I have my 39-week checkup, NST flying colors, and I go in and they measure my fundal length, which they've been doing every week for the past 4+ weeks, and every week it's been perfectly on what it's supposed to be. For some reason, this time it measured a little bit small. And my OB was just like, that's weird. Like, maybe I use a different tape measure. She got another tape measure out. She was like, it's still measuring small. She was like, you know what, just to be safe, let's go get an ultrasound. So we go on the ultrasound and she looks and she's like, well, everything looks perfect in there. But again, I hadn't had a detailed ultrasound since my NIME scan, 19 weeks earlier. So it's kind of hard to compare anything, you know, and again, this wasn't even like a detailed ultrasound. This is one in the office. It's not one at like when I did my anatomy scan, I went to the MFM's office where they like really, and who ended up being my MFM in later pregnancies, where they do a much more detailed ultrasound. They're trained to look for different stuff. But in the regular OB's office, like yeah, they look at them, they can check the heartbeat, they can make sure the baby's alive and not like in visible distress or anything. But they're not checking her growth curves. They're certainly not measuring her placenta, even like measuring how much fluid there is. And I think the reason I was measuring small, because again, this happened in my son's pregnancy the next time. At the very end of the pregnancy, my fluid levels started dropping. And I think that's what happened here. She's struggling, the amniotic fluid is created by the baby, as natural responses and processing waste and stuff like that. And it started, and she started not producing enough, and and my belly got a tiny bit smaller. But yeah, they looked on the thing, everything was fine. That night, I go home. I lay down to bed around 10 o'clock, which I was doing every night, and laying on my back because at this point the research out of Australia started in Australia, and now there's now been 5 separate international studies showing the same conclusion that sleeping on your back during the third trimester um, increases your risk of stillbirth by like 2 to 8 times, depending on the study. And but no one ever told. And a lot of doctors in the U.S. still don't like ascribe to this. They say, "Oh, that's not a thing," um, but they're just not aware of the research that's been done, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean,
And
that has to do with the cord being compressed in a certain sleep,
yeah,
getting
exactly.
enough.
And again, in most pregnancies, it shouldn't make a difference. But this is what they call the triple risk model of stillbirth, right? It's not it's a perfect storm. So in my case, she had this bad cord. I'm laying on my back, which puts pressure on your main arteries and stuff like that, which is supposed to be pumping blood. And then on top of it, my maternal factors, I had really, really, really healthy low blood pressure, and certainly nothing that a doctor will look at it and be concerned about because it's what they want to see, right? But what happens when you lay down to sleep? Every night your blood pressure naturally drops. So so my theory, and again, I don't know if this is not like proven or anything, but I think that the core compressions were happening overnight. I think, and that's why they didn't catch it on the NST, because during the day I'm not in that spot, but I'm laying on my
Mhm.
back at night and she's struggling, and my blood pressure's low to begin with. She just wasn't getting what she needed.
And that's why
Um,
those nightly, or, I think nightly is a good idea because, like you said, things change then. That's when a lot of babies are very active usually anyway. So do your kick counts
yeah,
around that time if you
exactly.
can.
Really kind
And then if you do notice a change, go in immediately. A lot of us kind of feel like we don't want to bother, like wake up the whole world, like it's the middle of the night. It must be just being, a little bit too worried or whatever. Go in immediately, because if you wait for your appointment the next morning, it might be too late, unfortunately. And that's what a lot of people end up telling the story. So I think it's important, continue to do kick counting. I mean, these are things, sadly, the mother has to be the one doing. And the only things we can offer you as far as like prevention tips are those. So we don't want anyone to feel
a
like,
lot of pressure.
guilt or too much stress over this. But these are things that we wish we had known. uh, Sleep position, there is definitely debate on that, but why not do it, right? You can be doing it. I did all my pregnancies. I don't know where I read it, but thank you, whoever wrote that. So it wasn't that for me, but I did sleep on my left side always, even though now they say either side's fine, but I still sleep that way too. I'm like used to it, and it's like, hey, we did
Exactly.
other weirder things, right? For pregnancy. I can tell you some stories, of all my pregnancies, what I tried to do to make my baby flip when she was, the wrong way. I did all this weird stuff with my husband. It's like,
Yeah,
why
with
are we
flipping,
lighting these
sliding,
things to
baptism,
your
yeah.
feet?
And I had
So
horrible hip pain in my next 2 pregnancies from sleeping on my side because I'm not a side sleeper. But I still managed, I found ways to get comfortable and do it because I just, by then the research had come out and I was aware of it and I was not going to take that chance. It was, and again, we always say that sleeping on your back doesn't cause a stillbirth, right? There's nothing you can do that's going to cause a stillbirth. But if you happen to have a quietly vulnerable baby, sleeping on your side is something you can do to help support them because you have, physiologically in the vast majority of pregnancies, better blood flow to your placenta and to your child. If you're on your side. And that's like the NICU nurses, or not NICU, L&D nurses have been trained for, decades that if a mom comes in with a baby in distress, turn her on her side, because that it helps. A lot of times they see that it helps improve the blood flow and get things under control, get things stable, right? So it's the same thought behind it. But yeah, so that night I lay down to bed, and she was always really active at bedtime, and she was really active again this night at bedtime. But it was different. It felt very different this time. It felt it felt like waves rolling through my belly, like downwards. And I knew from, again, I've been having anesthesia, so I knew from the anesthesia I'd been having Braxton Hicks contractions, but I hadn't felt them before. It showed up on the monitor, but I was like, I never felt anything. I was like, oh, well, this isn't painful at all. Like, this must be like a real Braxton Hicks. I can finally feel the Braxton Hicks contraction again. First time mom, I have no idea what a contraction is supposed to feel like. And it was weird because it was happening like kind of rhythmically too. It would happen like every 5 minutes for the next hour or so. And I was laying there just so literally smiling ear to ear, thinking, all right, she's getting ready. I'm a few days before my due date here. And she's getting ready. She's gonna be here soon. I'm so happy. And then after about an hour, it stopped. And I got up to go to the bathroom. And when I sat down, I found just the tiniest bit of blood for the first time ever, the whole pregnancy. I hadn't had any spotting or anything like that. But again, I just didn't worry about it because at my appointment that afternoon, they had stripped my membranes. And they had said, don't be surprised if you see a little bit of spotting. There's nothing to worry about. It's normal. Okay. I was like, oh, there's the spotting. I went to bed. The next day, I have racked my brains for close to a decade now to try to remember if I felt her move at all. But I just, was so convinced that she was coming, and I had a bunch of stuff to do around the house to be ready for the baby. So, I was doing stuff to keep busy. And the next thing I remember is around dinner time, I started feeling real contractions, started feeling like cramping. And then overnight it progressed. It was not very regular. So I didn't, go in. So again, I was very wary of, my labor getting rushed. And I was just like, I know this is not like real labor. Like, this is like early labor. So I stayed home. I called my doula to let her know I was laboring, and, reassure everything was fine. And, it wasn't until probably like 5 o'clock the next day, when I knew my doctor's office was going to be closing soon, that I decided to call and say, hey, just so you know, I've been having early labor, for the last, 24 hours about now. And so I'll probably be coming in either tonight or early morning, something like that, to deliver. And that was the first time that I had any indication that something might be wrong. The midwife who was on call answered, and she said, okay, how's the baby's movement? And I said, oh, I think it's fine, but it's kind of hard to tell the difference between the movement and the contractions. I, I can't really, I feel like the movement's always happening during the contractions. And she was like, well, I think maybe you should come in. And of course, alarm bells start going off. Oh, here we go. Here's my cascade of interventions trying to ruin my birth, right? And I'm just like, no, no, no. Like, I know my body. I'm like, I've been timing the contractions. Like, they're not regular. Like, this is not. And she was like, okay, please lay on your side, do a kick count, drink some juice, do a kick count. And, if you don't get 10 kicks in the next hour, please come in. And I'm like, okay, I mean, this is ridiculous, but fine. I choked down some like strawberry lemonade, closest thing I could find juice in the house, and, start doing my kick count. And again, first kick out the entire pregnancy, because I had asked about it early in the pregnancy, and they told me, oh no, that's only for high risk pregnancies. You don't need to worry about that. And, after 45 minutes, I think I felt like 4 things that might have been kicks, but they were all during contractions. In retrospect, I don't think any of them were actually kicks. I think it was just her body shifting around during contractions. And that's when I started to panic a little bit. And I was like, okay, we gotta go to the hospital. But still, as I walked out the door, I'll never forget, I locked eyes with my cat. And, my cat, my Geo, had spent the entire pregnancy on my belly. Again, we were all excited for this baby. That was his baby sister, and he was snuggled up to her through my belly the entire pregnancy. And he'd been a little aloof during the labor time, which was weird. Like, again, he wasn't like on top of me like he normally was. He kind of was off to the side. He just seemed a little off. And we locked eyes, and I just saw this look of panic in his face. And I was just like, don't worry, Geo, it's okay. Like, we're going to the hospital, but either we'll be back soon, or grandma will be here soon. like, trying to reassure the cat, but I could tell he knew. I mean, he knew that something was terribly wrong and that he didn't know how to tell me.
It's just so weird hearing the story. I mean, I've heard it many times, and I'm like, I really don't see what you could have done differently. I don't see what anyone would have done differently. And it's
Especially
really
given the
sad.
background of like, yeah, knowing what I was afraid of and, you know,
No, and then even just like you said, like you're starting to have labor. So, most people don't realize you can still feel movements throughout. They should still not
throughout the
change the
labor. Yeah, you think
behavior.
with labor starts that, you just look
That's a
for contractions.
misconception.
Nobody even
Yeah.
does pay attention to the baby's movements during labor. But the baby, we know now your baby should stay active and right on, right up through labor the same way. You should feel them strongly. Like obviously the movements will change a little bit, but they should still be moving. And yeah, so we got in the car and I just crying hysterically because I just knew my worst nightmare was about to come true. I was walking into an emergency C-section. And what I wouldn't give now for that to have been the case, right? I mean, so, I went in, they immediately put me on the NST, same spot. There was a blaring heartbeat every week, the past 4 weeks. I mean, it was 2 days earlier. I had been on the monitor in that exact same seat, in the exact same chair. Nothing, just silence. And again, still at this point, I still didn't realize that she had died. Like, that thought had never crossed my mind. I mean, how could a perfectly healthy baby in a perfectly healthy pregnancy die 2 days before her due date? Like, it's just not possible.
And you were
And
not feeling unwell or anything,
I
right?
was
Like
not feeling
the thing,
well. No, I
because
felt
it's
I
like
felt
we
good.
know, preeclampsia or placenta abruption. I mean, you start to
Yeah,
have
but I wasn't
symptoms.
having any of those symptoms. Yeah, exactly. It wasn't that kind of a stillbirth. So, yeah, there was no indication on my end that anything was wrong, other than the fact that she had stopped moving. But I just was not paying close enough
And
attention.
I want to like also highlight that point because as women in this society where we're expected mostly to continue to work up until our due dates, and we have other children, a lot of us, and everyone's mother has stories of how they did this and that, and they were all their kids were fine. I think we have gotten to the point where we just focus on like it's going to be fine, everything's perfect, our bodies can handle it, this and that, but all this pressure on the woman to keep performing in the workforce at home, and we don't slow down, and we have like the baby shower right before it's all this I think it's like you're trying to distract us from the fact that we are going into a situation which is a risk for us and for our babies, and no one wants to talk about that. No one wants to panic the women, and make us feel like realize really what we are going into,
Yeah,
because birth is
exactly.
not like a
Life
guarantee.
is a life or death situation. And it's like there's very few situations in life that are that way, but birth is one of them. And you're right, nobody addresses that explicitly. Except maybe again in the Black maternal health community where Black moms know that they're such at higher risk of dying. I think it's talked about more openly. But for us, you know, white suburban moms in our perfect pregnancies with our doulas and our, organic shakes and stuff, like that is not something that's on our radar. Like,
Mm-mm.
right, we don't die in birth. Our babies don't die in birth. And if you do, you must have done something terribly wrong. And and that was the worst part about this, was that I walk in there, there's no heartbeat. They bring us in there like, oh, the machine's not working, let's go in the let's go in the to the ultrasound. They put the ultrasound on, and I just look at the screen, and I'm just like, there's a line at the bottom that should be blipping because that shows the heartbeat, and it was just flat. And I was just like trying to process, like I'm trying to put the pieces together, because again, no one ever said the words, your baby could die at the days before she's due. And then the midwife turned to us and said, I'm sorry, there's no heartbeat. And even in that moment, still, I was just like looking at her like, okay, like, what are you going to do about it? Like, like my husband and me, like, I'll never forget the sound of him crying no behind me and just like breaking down. But I'm still looking for a solution here. I'm just like, and like, I'm looking at her, and she was like, if there's anything we could do, you'd be on an operating table already. Like, I'm sorry. Like, she's gone. And I'm just like, and then it was just like so surreal. Like I couldn't even believe, like, just like in a fog, the shock is like so real. Like you just, and it's funny because I'd always wondered like how I would react in a crisis. Like we read about this in like books or like stories and stuff. Like what would I do? Like would I be one of those people who freezes? Would I be? And apparently I'm real good in a crisis. I just shut down my emotions and I'm just like, okay, here's what we need to do. Like I need to get through this birth. I need to make sure I stay alive because my family will die if I die too. Like, I need to, like, okay, I'm gonna have to get an induction. I never read about an induction. What do I need to know? Like, how am I gonna learn? Who do I need to call? How am I gonna make sure that my parents and my in-laws don't die in a car accident trying to drive over here when they're so upset? Like, these are the things that are going through my mind, not my baby is dead and now I have to deliver her body. Like, but that's exactly where my husband went first. And so he was just destroyed. I mean, I just remember I called my mom. My mom was just like, that's impossible. That's impossible. And I was like, I know it's impossible, but that's what they're telling me. Like, yeah, the whole thing was just so crazy. So, they gave us the option of going home, waiting it out. I was definitely in early labor. She was definitely coming. Or going down to the hospital and just starting an induction to get it over with. And that was all like, I just wanted to get through it. Like I just needed this nightmare to be over. And I was really scared of the birth. I didn't really say it out loud, but I could count on one hand the number of times I've seen a dead body. I certainly never touched one, certainly never gave birth to one. And it was never, I'd never lost anybody. The closest person I'd lost to me was like my dog. I had no experience with grief. Like the whole thing was just so surreal. It was just like a twilight zone, like this cannot be happening. This is not my life. So we went down, and my doula actually came, but she was so out of her depth, like clearly just like lost, had no idea what to do. She was not trained in bereavement. So after a while, the nurse was like, do you actually want her here? And I was like, no. And so the nurse asked her to leave for me, which was great. My parents got there, and I just thank God for my mom, because my mom sadly had been through tragedy in her life before. She lost her father when she was young. And I remember at one point I turned to my mom when the nurses had kind of stepped away and was just like, are they going to want me to hold her? And my mom, thank God, was like, yes, you want to hold her. Like you want to hold her. And, I was just so scared. I just didn't know what to expect. And, the induction went great. I got an epidural, again, something I birth planned right out the window, but it felt fine. Induction, I had a great epidural. I had a great induction. My body responded wonderfully. I had, no pain, pushed a handful of times. She came after a couple hours, and she came out and she was beautiful. And she was perfect and she was warm and she looked like she'd just been sleeping, like literally, like, not every stillborn baby is like that. You see a lot of pictures of babies who have like the dark lips and stuff like that. And Alana, for some reason, wasn't like that. I mean, she just was perfect. And, we held her. I wish I had held her longer than I did. My mom held her for a long time. We got a couple, crappy cell phone pictures because, of course, this is 2013. The phones were not the way they are today. And, her birth was actually really nice. It actually, except for the one really, really important fact of her not being alive, I mean, it was everything I had been hoping for. It didn't matter that my birth plan had gone out the window. I felt strong. I felt the connection to my daughter. I mean, it was beautiful. There was so much love. There was so much love in the room. And all those things I had been so scared of the whole pregnancy, like, just were totally irrelevant. And it was just so unfortunate. The one thing that I should have been scared of the whole pregnancy, I never even knew to look out for, and that's, and that for me was the biggest thing coming out of this. Like, and then of course, when we got home, there were so many things I wish I had done. I wish I had spent more time with her. I wish I had read her a book. I wish I had dressed her. Like, you get very few opportunities to parent our babies who die, and you don't realize how precious those hours are. You know, again, I just wanted to get through it, and I just, you know, kind of like checked off the boxes quickly, but I just didn't really take the time that I wish I'd taken with her. Um, you know, and I had a lot of guilt over that later, of course, you know, and I always tell their parents, like, you did the best you could with the knowledge you had at the time, and that's all that you could do. And, you know, it just very quickly, I remember it was about 4 weeks after her birth, I finally worked up the nerve to announce it because, of course, everyone I knew that I was pregnant. And so I needed to tell them all that the baby had died. And, you know, so I wrote up her birth story and I published it to my blog and put it up on Facebook and stuff like that. And I mean, there was a beautiful outpouring of support from people. But the reason I did that was because I was like, if I can save one person from feeling as alone as I do right now, I'm feeling like the only person that this has ever happened to, if I can save one person from having the regrets that I have about not spending the time I did, and most importantly, I mean, if I could save one person from having the regrets I do about not paying closer attention to her movement, about not sleeping on my back, about um, you know, about pushing back on my doctors, about trusting my doctors, you know, like there's a construction, sorry. Um,
Yeah, we have a lot of what ifs, which is really, really hard. And
well, it's the worst. It's the worst. I mean,
even thinking though, the things that you're saying now, would they have made the biggest difference? You know, you have to have really thought about stillbirth. And that's why when I said at the beginning, watch this, if you're pregnant, don't, you know, go to the next thing on your screen, because I know it sounds scary and everything, but this is not contagious. Knowing about it will actually prepare you to kind of fight back further if you are feeling something's wrong. And I do think that intuitive feeling is actually probably the only real red flag many of us get. You know, the movement change, yes, but even that, you may not know what that means if it's not explained, you know, really well to you. And, you know, not like those cases I said, some people have a change and then their baby's fine, you know, so you hear all this stuff anecdotally. So it's really, really tough being the parent that this happens to, and then later thinking, you know, oh, what if I'd done this and that? So, and it's hard for us, you know, sharing our story. It's like you always are going to feel guilt because you're the mom and you wish you could have done more. And you're just like, gosh, if I'd only done that one thing, you know, we go back to that day all the time. And it's just so incredibly unfair, you know, to live like this. But I do think like at our time, people were not speaking out about stillbirth as much. I don't know that I looked it up because no one told me my baby was stillborn. So I actually had a crash C-section. He wasn't moving, brought him out. They didn't resuscitate in time. They couldn't get him back. So no one said the word. So of course I didn't Google that. So like I didn't have all these people that now you, if you look up stillbirth, if it happens to you, unfortunately, you can see all these communities and people and the things that they do and the ideas, like getting a mold of the hand and the feet. Like I didn't know about any of that. And I never even thought it was normal to want to hold your baby and all that. So, you know, thankfully they talked me into holding my son, but I was the same. I was shocked by the fact that he was going to be dead. And I like, how could I be around a dead person, let alone my baby, and see him and have that like implanted in your memory? And then later you're thinking like, I wish I had more memories, you know? So it sucks because in that time you were like guarding yourself as much as you could, you know, like I don't want all these memories of this, but yet now it's like, oh, I should have made more memories then. That's all I got. You know, even with my daughter not meeting my son, I was, you know, unfortunately scared of her reaction of a dead baby and her brother. So we never did, you know, a nice picture of them together. And she doesn't have that physical connection with Owen. Unfortunately, she was at the funeral, but we didn't want her to see the baby or anything. So, you know, she never saw Owen until later in pictures. And she was kind of like, well, why didn't I get to hold him? And I'm like, oh, you're right. Like, that does suck. But at the time, I had this whole grief adverse, death adverse thing in my head that no one can see, you know, I only had select people who could see him, you know, and everything. And now after it's like, oh, I wish everyone knew him. I wish everyone had a chance to hold him and realize he was real. You know, it's so much different after it happens to you. So
yeah, absolutely. And yeah, so that's always been my thing. And again, it's from the very beginning. And I just felt like I needed to share my story because there was so much I had learned, right, too late. And that I just don't want any other parent to have to carry the what ifs that we do, right? Like I wish that
That's
I
a
wish
good segue to tell us about Push because we were like,
yeah.
we're only going to talk for an hour. And I'm pretty sure we're way over an hour because we could talk for all day. But the point is, our tragedy has taught us what we're sharing. And I think, some people might get tired of it. I'm sure you've posted so much about stillbirth in the last, how many years? How old would Alana be now?
She would be 9 this October.
9. That's a long time. And you've been fighting ever since the loss, pretty much to understand it and joining different organizations and really pushing for change, trying to prevent it from happening. Because, like, for us, it's like, yeah, I mean, people can say all day, like, oh, that would have been really hard to catch, but we want you to try. At least let us know that you are trying and that everyone's trying and that you're making parents aware.
Exactly.
So,
Like we always say,
how,
we know you can't prevent every stillbirth, but every family who has a loss deserves to know that they and their providers did everything possible to give their baby the best possible chance. Because that's the part that's hard to live with, right? Like losing a child under any circumstances is horrific and something I would not wish on my worst enemy. But I think that when you know that there was nothing you could have done differently, that it wasn't your fault, that, everything possible had been done to prevent it. Like I have friends who, who lost a child, deeply loved, wanted child to, like one of the trisomies or something like that, or like it's just a baby that just never would have been able to survive outside the womb. And that was a horrific, horrific thing for them to go through, but they never carried the what ifs that we do with a potentially preventable stillbirth. And that's the thing that I think is so important. And um and then beyond that, of course, the bereavement care. If to know that even if the absolute worst happens and you do end up delivering a stillborn baby, you can still have a really beautiful birth experience. You can like that love is there regardless, that your child will always be a part of your life, if you choose for them to be. That you can, there are other ways, like we found through Push, to parent our babies who have died. And that love is powerful. And it's, our babies are having an impact, like their lives matter. And we could see that every day in the work that we're doing, and that is something that I couldn't have envisioned before, right? um so
right.
yeah, I mean, we don't want anyone to ever have a stillbirth. We won't be able to stop everybody, unfortunately, but we want to make sure that people at least feel that they did what they could and they don't have to carry regrets that are just soul shredding. And we want, if it does happen to you, people to know like how to make memories, to make the most of that time, and to know, what that they're not alone. Because I think that's the only thing that's really ever brought me any comfort, is finding other parents that have been through this and
Mhm.
survived. Because I didn't know what that looked like. Like I thought my life was just over. It's just like everything would be horrible from here on out. And it was that way for a few years there. Um, but it's not anymore. I mean, and it's a really hard thing to explain to people who haven't been through it, and especially to new lost parents who are really there in the bottom of the abyss right now. That it does get better. And because I still can't articulate how. I still don't really even understand how, but it does. And it's not because we have forgotten our babies. It's not because we left Alana and Owen behind. It's not because we've moved on. um
Not because of the other children.
Not because of our, yep, Alana and Owen's baby brothers and sisters who came after, like, but you just, they're still a part of our family, important part of our family.
Mm.
Not the way we hoped, not the way we would choose, but they're here. And I think that's really empowering to know too. Like I just, I just wish I had known that this was a possibility, that this could even happen. You know, I always say, like, how can parents protect themselves, protect their children against a risk they don't even know exists? And we talk about all these other things, right? We talk about SIDS, we talk about car crashes,
Fear,
we
yeah.
talk about, you know, attaching your furniture to the walls, you know, listeria. Yes. We talk about all things that could go wrong during birth too. We talk about, you know, unnecessary interventions. We talk about, you know, how to avoid a C-section unless it's absolutely necessary. Like, why is this shrouded in silence? Why does everyone make stillbirth a big secret? Like, you shouldn't have to find out what stillbirth is. Like you said, I didn't hear the word stillbirth until I went home from the hospital after delivering my stillborn baby and Googled it. And Googled, no, I Googled from her death certificate, intrauterine fetal demise, to figure out what that meant. And that's when the word stillbirth, the first time someone said the word stillbirth to me was like when I Googled the term from her death certificate. Um, and yeah, like that's insane. Again, stillbirth, sad. I mean, yes, less than 1% of births, but it is not uncommon. Everybody, it's you. Stillbirths occur on the same like kind of magnitude of scale as car accidents. The same way everybody knows somebody who died in a car accident, everybody knows somebody, probably multiple somebodies who had a stillbirth. But the thing is that until it happens to you, you just don't know because no one's ever talked about it. But I found out there are people I've known for 30 years who had a stillbirth, and we just never knew.
Well, I
Um,
think an important part of that is really the fact that we don't all get the cause, like I mentioned at the beginning. So, what can we even talk about? Like when it happened to me, I didn't know why my son died. So, I couldn't come out of that and say to other pregnant women, well, be careful about this, or this is why my son died. So, you know, and I would have shared that personal, really traumatic information just to help somebody else avoid it. But
yeah,
I had nothing to go by. And I think in the past, obviously, even less so, you know, these grandmothers now are on our page saying, oh, you can prevent stillbirth. And I'm like, yes, you can. And I'm so sorry. Like you've gone your whole life thinking it was, you know, nothing that could have been done. And maybe for some people that gives peace, you know, thinking it's just God's will, it happens, you
but I
know.
think for more people, it's a sense of shame and feeling
Yeah.
like I did, which is that I must have made some kind of terrible mistake, and I
Mhm.
don't know what it was, and you know, and instead of and internalizing that, you know, because that's kind of unfortunately how things have been set up. Like the medical community for a very long time, still to this day, you know, most doctors are trained that stillbirth is not preventable. It just happens. There's nothing you can do about it. And that's well and good for them because, you know, then they don't have to take on that emotional responsibility. But as a mother, that's not possible. Like one thing I read that when I was feeling my grief, that made me feel a little bit better about blaming myself was that, you know, even if you're, you know, say your child was a 5-year old who ran in front of a car and you weren't there, you weren't the one watching them that day, you know, you would still blame yourself. You would say, why didn't I teach them not to go in front of a car? Like, why did I trust this person? You know, like you would always take responsibility as the mother. And so, you know, that's made it really convenient for, you know, the medical community to be like, oh, well, you know, there's nothing you can do about it. And like, because they're not the parent, that's good enough for them. They can go home and they can sleep at night. But as a parent, that doesn't work. And instead, it's just resulted in moms feeling guilty, feeling shame, feeling stigmatized, feeling regret. And that's not fair. I mean, it's really not fair. I didn't realize how widespread that was until I started talking to other parents. You know, so if you hadn't, and again, like you said, I had to really dig to find this community back in 2013. Now you can put in hashtag stillbirth and tons of stuff comes up on Instagram and TikTok, and it's wonderful to be able to find people that easily. But that didn't exist back then. And I remember like Google, like putting into Google, like stillbirth blog, like, you know, because I found like one or two blogs here and there. And then, you know, as you get into it, you find more, but it was really hard to find those initial resources, and to not feel alone, to understand that the things that I was feeling were normal, they were healthy, they were valid. Um, and I desperately needed that. I desperately needed that. And it wasn't until, you know, I heard this same story that I told today out of the mouths of thousands of other mothers that it finally clicked for me that if we are all making the same mistakes in our pregnancy, that's not the failings of any one individual parent. Like that is a system level failure. That is that is the that is you know the right information not getting to the right people at the right time. And
Can
that's
I just add to that? Like, if you Google right now, fetal movement change, you will get a massive amount of misinformation and, all different ideas about how that is normal, how you should drink something sugary, you
yeah,
know,
there's
ice
medicine,
water, and take your time, do 2 more hours of kick counting,
like
then call your doctor.
wrong advice.
It's all over the place. So if you do see anything like that, please feel free to DM me. I would love to get the links because we are with Push Pregnancy going through the internet right now,
Yeah, we've
get
got a wonderful
compiling.
team of very determined parents who are we're calling it the internet scrub, finding every piece of misinformation about fetal movement and about stillbirth on the internet that we can, and trying to get it fixed. Because yeah,
Because
we
if you
literally
read
moms have
that, what
children
can
who
you
did
do?
that while their baby was still alive, listened to that advice, didn't go get checked up, and then their baby died.
Mhm.
So we need to fix that.
Yeah, I mean, I went to like what to expect when you're expecting that night, and I read that, takes 2 hours, do your kick count, try sugary things. And I believe that's still on there. We're still, trying to contact everybody. But also, I called my ER. And so the ER is not trained to respond properly to like these emergency situations in a lot of hospitals. So they told me, eat something, do another
Yeah,
kick
and a
count,
lot of doctors' offices too. Like, the way that it's so hard now. Again, our doctors, because of the way our medical system has changed in the past few decades, and all these like private practices got bought out by these large medical systems, which aren't medical systems. They're businesses, right? And their motivation, these managed care systems is to turn a profit. And that that's really tough because the doctors are there to practice medicine, and in order to do that in a way that you are maximizing profits means you have to see more patients, which means you have less time every day to see your patients, which means that you can't answer the phone yourself to talk to patients when they call. So instead they're getting triaged by like a receptionist, someone with zero medical training, right? Like, and a lot of patients don't realize it because this is still relatively new, a new change in our medical system. And like there are some medical advisors we work with at Push who watched this happen over the course of their career, and they're like horrified because doctors want to practice medicine in a certain way to provide the best possible care, and they physically cannot, and expect to keep their jobs when the practice has been bought out by one of these big systems that's like, if you don't hit this certain quota, like they physically can't make ends meet. I mean, it's really bad. It's really bad. And the thing that upsets me a lot is that, and a lot of the stuff you hear online, especially, doctors and patients are being pitted against each other, and that's not what it should be because we're on the same team. You know, you as the parent, your provider, your baby, you are the team that's going to make sure that you and your baby get through pregnancy safely. And who unfortunately you're fighting against a lot of time is this insurance system, which again is just incentivized to get you through the pregnancy as cheaply as possible. The legal system, which leaves parents of stillborn babies with basically no rights to hold anyone accountable when mistakes are made, or just to change things in standard practice, like the fact that we don't measure the placenta, to be better, because the insurance companies and these managed care companies, the standard of care, as long as they all do it the same way, it protects them from being sued. And so if you start doing something differently as a doctor, even to try to do better, to try to save a child's life, it puts you in a position where you're very likely to be sued. And then guess what? You lose your malpractice insurance coverage. You're reporting to this boss, that you decades ago you wouldn't have had because you own your own business and you're an individual. Like the whole thing is really bad. It's really, really bad.
And also throw in that we don't have the system where everyone has one protocol, because it's done differently at every hospital. So it's really hard because we see this being done in other countries and we're like, well, that would be great. Let's get that protocol started here. And like, first of all, our country wants their own research, for ACOG to kind of sanction anything has to be done on our families here in America, which is like, okay, pretty sure the same reasons that other people are having stillbirths are the same reasons we are, but let's go through that process, right? And we do not have enough funding. We do not have enough support for research. We don't even have data collection properly yet. So everyone, please ask your senator, push to shine for automatic. We need things like that, in place before we can even have a conversation about let's start this protocol, which then every hospital has to agree to on their own. I mean, we don't have
exactly. Like in the UK and Australia, all it took was a determined group of parents to go to their governments and say, this is a crisis and needs to be addressed. And guess what? They've nationalized medical care. So, once the government was on board and their elected officials said, oh, yeah, we need to do this, the government just said, hey, we're going to fix this and everybody has to do it. And it is what it is. But things do not work that way here in the US. And that's why we're fighting so hard at Push, right, to create change, because it's going to take a lot more to remove this inertia that we have and get our government leaders, our medical leaders, and society in general, the general public. Again, there's just so little awareness that stillbirth is happening, that can happen in a healthy, low risk pregnancy like mine, and that there are things you can do to lower your risk. I mean, people literally just don't know these things. And I'm a perfect example of that because I thought I knew everything there was to know about pregnancy. And I had no clue that this could happen to me and my daughter.
And I will say, like, when I put a TikTok up about this, I get a lot of pushback from people like, stop scaring moms. This doesn't happen to everyone. You're projecting. And I'm like, well, that was very rude, first of all. I'm just here to like inform and help people, but okay. Throw my trauma like in my face. I get it. I do have trauma.
You're trauma dumping.
I come from a different perspective, which is reality of loss. It happened to me and it was a low percent chance. So I'm sharing what I know, but for me, it was just like, it's shocking because there is so much pushback from people to not scare moms. And I will say, had I been scared like I was for my pregnancy after loss, I could have actually been a lot more alert. And I could have been like, you know what? This feeling I've been having, I don't like it. I'm going to get some more tests, even though they're telling me it's just my iron, and I'm okay otherwise. So I think it's a reality. You do have to get a little bit scared of stillbirth. You have to understand that is a risk for everyone, especially low risk pregnancy, especially if first time mom.
80% of moms who go on to have a stillbirth had zero risk factors at their first checkup.
That's that naive feeling though, like you're set up, you're feeling untouchable. You're like, oh, well, everything's been perfect. I'm the textbook pregnancy. Well, my baby's a little weird today, but no, that's setting you up for failure. So I want to tell everyone who's like afraid right now, don't take it just like a fear. Like use it to empower yourself. If you ever have a feeling, just say to yourself, you know what, I'm not going to back down. I'm going to go in there and I'm going to sit there until they do all the tests and I see everything feels better again. Don't go home if you're not reassured because they might feel reassured by their tests. But guess what? Their tests are not perfect and they are not testing everything. They're not looking at your cord, the flow, everything. I mean, you can ask. Yep. You can ask, you can try, you can say, look at the cord right now or look at the placenta.
But even with that, most times anesthesia is like 20 minutes. And if you're having an intermittent issue like cord compression, that's not going to catch it. Like you might need to stay on for, 2 hours. You might have to stay on overnight and you're totally within your rights to ask for that. But if you don't know that stillbirth is a possibility, why would you ever think to ask that? I mean, you said earlier, Anna, like you're thinking about, like, as I tell my story, like, what could you have done differently? And the thing is that as the person that I was in the pregnancy that I was and the knowledge that I had, I couldn't have done anything differently than what I did. But in retrospect, now, like you said, through our subsequent pregnancies, like here's what I would have done differently. Number one, I would have been sleeping on my side, right? Number two, I would have been doing at minimum a daily kick count and also just getting to know, my baby's normal patterns, like the fact that which I did notice that she, would be active at bedtime. I would be looking for the strength of her movement to make sure that her movements were getting stronger throughout the pregnancy instead of less strong. I would have been having more regular ultrasounds. I would have requested third trimester, specifically ultrasounds, because, if you don't have an ultrasound, how do you catch it? And you have no baseline again. And I would have been asking that throughout the pregnancy. They were measuring, not only her growth, fetal growth, and putting it on a chart, which they do typically do, especially in a high risk pregnancy, but also my placenta's growth. Because even though I did not have a small placenta, if they had been charting my placenta's growth throughout the course of the pregnancy, what they would have seen is that my placenta and my baby started out in the same growth curve, and they were following along until she hit 37 weeks. And then she continued, and then the placenta continued to grow the way it was supposed to, and she flattened out.
She wasn't getting her nutrients
She
anymore.
wasn't getting, and again,
That just like gives me chills right now because I know many mothers, you know, unfortunately their babies are gone who had the small placenta.
yeah.
And I had,
Then the opposite case, baby kept growing, the placenta stopped, and then it's like,
yeah, it's
well,
like, this is way too obvious for this to be missed. That's why
way too obvious.
for
It's
it,
infuriating when you understand how simple, because EPV is a 33 measurements, 3 lines on a 2D. Any 2D ultrasound takes 30 seconds. Like there's absolutely no reason that this isn't done in every, and it could catch babies, and like Alana, because again, if your baby, if they do a growth scan and your baby's under like the 10th percentile, and they're like, oh, she's growth restricted, and then they would watch her more closely, right? But Alana was like 50th or like 80th percentile. Like a 6.5 pound baby at 39.5 weeks is not considered small, right? Like never would have flagged her as being small, but she was smaller than she should have been. I mean, my other two children, again, electively induced at 37 weeks, they were both nearly or over 8 pounds, 2 weeks earlier than their sister. Like if they had gone full term like her, they probably would have been 10-pound babies. Like, she was smaller than she should have been because she dropped off her curve. And they could have caught that if they'd been looking at the charts. Another thing, fetal maternal hemorrhage, there is a test. It's called a KB, Clyde-Howard-Becky test, that they can do, which literally it's just blood sample from the mom. Because if there's any fetal blood cells in the mom's blood, that's a red flag. That should never happen. They should not be crossing the placenta. Keep that stuff. So the fact that she was bleeding into my placenta and then her blood was getting into my placenta could have caught it. Unfortunately, I think what I've heard from our medical advisors is that test is not super sensitive. So like a lot of time, it only actually catches it about 3% of the time. And I think that's because, I might be wrong here, but my understanding is that because the mom's body, if it's functioning properly, it's filtering that out. It filters impurities out of blood, and your immune system considers, foreign blood in your blood and a waste product, right? So unless you happen to do the test like right while a bleed was happening or shortly thereafter, it might not catch it, or if it was a large quantity. But it's something that could have been tried, and they do recommend doing that if you have a stillbirth and they don't have a cause for it. They will recommend you take mom's blood right away to see if they can find evidence of a maternal fetal bleed. But yeah, like lots of things. There's just so many things.
yeah, and I will say like this is why Sacred Birth Circle, we say beyond the pregnancy guide, because none of this was in our pregnancy guide. And I'm like, even CMV, it's like, no one told me not to kiss my toddler. I had
Yeah.
a toddler at home. I could have got CMV. My baby could have died from that or had complications,
Yeah.
disabilities for
Yeah,
life.
strep. What happened to you with
Yeah,
Csection?
I had GBS. I didn't even know what that was, but I knew I felt I had an infection. I just kept pushing. And so, like I said, like had I known about stillbirth with Owen, I might have acted differently because I knew about stillbirth with Jax, and I did not stop hassling them until they found which infection it was, because they were like set on the fact that I didn't have one. They tested me for other ones and they said, nah, well, we could test one more, but we don't think you have that. Sure enough, the next day she calls, she says, you have a GBS infection. We'll get you the medication and everything will be fine. Because at this point in my pregnancy, I had a high risk pregnancy with the cerclage and I did not need an infection. And I don't know what it was about me, but that whole pregnancy, I had this intuition that I was going to go into early labor and it was going to be caused by an infection. Don't tell me why. I never had this happen before. I never had normal labor. My first one had to be C-section too. So I just had this intuition and I was like, okay, I'm not going to move a lot at the beginning of pregnancy, like no crazy walking like I would have done. And then continued to 20 week. And I did have my cerclage in place because I was having competent cervix. I was going into early labor. Who knows how I had this premonition, so it's so weird. And that's why I feel like this whole sacred thing that we have with the page is like, just trust yourself. You have this soul connection with your baby, and there's some communication that's going to happen at some point. And God forbid it goes this way, but you can take action if you feel something's going on and you just have that intuition, like,
Exactly. You
I
don't
did,
know
you
the things
know.
that are risks. You can't even ask for it. Like we have so many people on our team too who had, who had losses in like the 20s due to 20 weeks gestation. I mean, due to incompetent cervix or what do I prefer to
Which
call
they don't
early cervical
actually,
dilation.
yeah,
Yeah,
and they don't actually check that normally, right? So
like
I
you could
was with the high risk doctor. So again, you do get better care with that. So if had I been a low risk pregnancy, well, I'm sorry, that baby probably
nobody
wouldn't
would
have
have
a
been
year
doing
either.
ultrasound at 16 weeks, right? Like if you request a transvaginal ultrasound at 16 weeks, they can check your cervix and make sure it's not shortening. And at that point, if they find that it is, it's enough time to do some kind of cerclage. But if you wait even 4 weeks later, when you typically would have an anatomy scan, a lot of times it's too late. The baby's just too big, it's too heavy, and you end up losing the pregnancy with an otherwise healthy child. And these are all things that nobody tells you about.
No.
And like, why doesn't anyone tell us these things? Like, we deserve to know. We are thinking like intelligent human
Yeah,
beings.
I was gonna say it's a little condescending of women
It's
for real,
condescending,
but
it's sexist. I mean, that's let's call it what it is. It's completely misogynist to act like, oh, we can't tell moms about risks in pregnancy because it's gonna scare them too much. Like, you tell us every time we get on an airplane that I might crash and we would die, and let's do this long, emergency thing about how we would prepare for that, right? Do you know what the chances of dying in a plane crash are? 1 in 11 million, something like that, according to FAA. The chances of having a stillbirth are 1 in 170. 170. Nobody ever mentions it could happen or what you could do. What you could do, A, to avert it, or B, if this happens to you, like as a bereavement care, to like make good choices in that situation, right? Like, it's infuriating. It's
I
infuriating.
mean, we can go on all day. I
I
think we're
know,
on hour
Gabby.
two
The
right now,
version that's coming out, right?
but
Okay. This is
there will be an
so long.
edited version on YouTube, a little bit shorter. No, I don't think I could cut anything out of this because I think you need to hear it. And if, we haven't talked much about stillbirth, we talked about it a little bit with Ray, but if I had to have someone do it, I wanted Sam to go into depth with it. So I'm glad we kind of shared a lot. And,
Yeah.
it's really a painful situation to be the parent of a baby that's not here. And that, especially if you feel anything could have been done differently. And we just don't want anyone to live with that type of regret and, pain. And you can't save them all. We know that, but we can definitely try and we will be trying. And if you're one of those people who are with us, you want to save babies, please join us with Push for Empowered Pregnancy. We're always taking change makers, or you can donate, or you can help us, talk to the right people. If your hospital is willing to be trained about Rainbow Clinic, pregnancy after loss, we have a really great training for that as well.
Yep.
You can provide more sensitive training and just really understand.
Or even just like, comment, share, save. I mean, it helps. It really helps. Our reach on social media has grown exponentially in the past year, and you never know who something is going to reach, right? Just the other day, my Evander, right, got a message from a mom, who was following her, and said, hey, because of what happened to you and Mason and what you have shared from Push and about fetal movements, I was, I think, like 3 weeks from her due date, and noticed a change in her baby's movements and decided to go get it checked out. And it turned out her baby was in distress, and they delivered, and everything was fine. But she said, I would have ignored this if I hadn't known. So you never know who you're going to reach. It's always worth sharing, and even just a like or a comment helps work the algorithms, right, to get this in front of more people and help educate them. So
Yeah, I think everyone needs to get past the feeling that they're going to make it happen to someone, or it's contagious, that
yeah,
kind of
it's
feeling.
not
Because
contagious.
if you see
Worry
it
about
and
what
read it,
people
it's not going to happen to you. It's more likely not going to happen to you.
can happen to you. Exactly. So, don't be, we always say that, like, yes, is it scary? Absolutely. But you should feel empowered after hearing about stillbirth, because now you know what you can do to lower your risks. And you know that if God forbid it happens to you or someone you love, that you are not alone, and that there's a whole community out there to catch you and support you, and help you, find that light to guide you out of the darkness, and find ways to honor and parent your child. I mean,
Go to the big push with us.
yes, come with us to DC. There's going to be hopefully 23,000 of us there in
If not,
October.
virtually we'll have some options as well. So go to thebigpush.org and find out about that register and let
Satellite
us know
events
if you
across
can
the
come.
country. Like we've got, I think there's 8 or 10 already that are planned.
Yeah, exactly. You can have your own little walk with your family around your community and just hashtag us so that we can, make sure to count you as part of our march. But we want to make sure people realize 23,000 babies a year is a lot. I mean, I don't see us actually getting that many physical empty strollers because that's like a huge goal we had from the start. But imagine that that's how many babies we're trying to represent with this march.
We
And
do
that,
have 23,000 baby hats.
oh yeah, donation. If anyone wants to donate strollers, let us know. We can put it out there. It'd be a great opportunity for you to, also bless the community because we're donating items after. But
Yeah, of course.
we wanted more people to come home with those babies. So it's symbolic, but it also means let's get those strollers full of baby, living babies.
Home safe.
Yeah. And, we'll do everything we can on our end to empower families through the education information, but we definitely need our politicians and people with power to listen to this as well and see what you can do, at that level, because it does need to come up from the top down as well. We're trying to like empower the parents, but really if they go in and then they're not getting the proper care at that moment when they're received and kind of written off, or just given a quick heartbeat check or something and they don't know better, so that could still be a bad ending. So it has to be systematic as well.
I love what you guys are doing here at Safe Your Birth Circle. And yeah, we'll push will be here to support you always. And if anyone out there has any questions or concerns about their pregnancy, never hesitate to reach out to us. We're here. We are parents just like you, and we have a lot of hard-won wisdom to share. So don't hesitate to utilize us as a resource.
Yeah, that's what we're here for. And we don't know everything. We're not doctors, but we definitely can direct you to some people that can help you. And I think the most important thing is just trust yourself, keep fighting for yourself and your baby, and hope you have a wonderful birth experience. And
that's how you have an empowered pregnancy, right?
Yeah. And so have a great day, everybody. Thank you so much, Samantha, for sharing Alana's story and doing all that you're doing to help others have better birth outcomes. If that wasn't a Beyond the Pregnancy Guide episode, I don't know what would be. I hope you gained so much information from this discussion with Samantha, and also encourage you to continue to look further into stillbirth and stillbirth prevention, because knowing about it is half the battle. There's just so much information that you can gain. Remember, stillbirth is not contagious, but awareness is equal to prevention, because you'll know what to do. And any concerns that you do have, we ask that you always remember to speak to your medical team. Our episodes are not medical advice, but they're here to help you on your journey through your pregnancy, to know the questions you need to ask, to advocate for yourself. We hope that today's episode has informed you a little bit more about what you can do to prepare yourself for your birth and your pregnancies. Please go to Sacred Birth Circle to follow us on all social media, Instagram and Facebook, and make sure you're sharing our posts with all your friends and family, because we are here as a community to help share our womb wisdom, everything we've learned from our own pregnancies, so that other families can have a wonderful experience and birth outcome. Goodbye for now.